Good evening there, everybody. What is happening? Hopefully, y'all are having a wonderful day today. So, when it comes down to it, I thought, of course, that I would talk about this video and this topic that I found, of course, very particularly interesting. Now, of course, because of the most recent events of that of the Vasily Lomachenko and Devin Haney fight, and for some people there being heavy controversy, for some others there not being any. I thought that I would kind of do a couple videos on that. So, and on top of that, with my busyness as of late, I was not really able to do any videos about this particular subject, unfortunately. But now that I'm getting to it, of course, for those of you that have watched boxing this year, it truly has been a great year of boxing. They've truly given a great gift to that of the boxing fans. Vasily Lomachenko versus Devin Haney was a great fight and a great matchup that had occurred. Gervonta Tank Davis versus Ryan Garcia, which was a matchup in the years of making. Of course, David Benavidez versus Caleb Plant, and I'm probably missing one or two other different potential matchups as well, although I can't really think about them. But anyways, when it comes down to it, of course, for those of you that have not heard the big news as of late, Terence Crawford versus Errol Spence Jr. has been announced, and I believe that it's announced a couple months from now. I believe that of July 29th. And of course, this fight has the potential to be one of the best fights in boxing. That's if, of course, it is a very highly competitive fight. Of course, I am very highly excited for this fight because not only does it mean a lot for boxing in my view, but it means a lot for both of their careers. And the best of fights out there, of course, are the ones with the most on the line. And it means a lot for both fighters. But I think that if we're really talking about it, it probably means the most for that of Terence Crawford. And the reason why I say that is because there's been a lot of allegations about Terence Crawford within the past 10 years or around there, pretty much ever since he was able to unify the 140-pound weight division. And of course, he ended up getting his great start by beating Yuriorkis Gamboa. That's when he was finally put on the limelight in terms of the top 10 pound per pound list. But Terence Crawford, there's been certain people, a lot of people that have stated that he truly belongs as the number one pound per pound fighter. And I don't really have a huge problem with that. I, of course, have disagreed with that. I think skill wise and dominance wise, that, of course, he's up there with anybody. My problem with Terence Crawford has always been that, in my view, the biggest wins in his career are over Victor Postal, Sean Porter, and Yuriorkis Gamboa. And in my view, I just can't have a fighter that has almost 40 fights on his resume, and those are the three biggest wins in his career, and have you as my number one pound per pound fighter. I just couldn't do it. And that was a big part of the reason why I had both Lomachenko and, for certain, Canelo Alvarez over him. And as of right now, in my view, the number one pound per pound spot, I'm not really sure who it would convincingly go to. I don't think that anyone really has the definitive crown. Right now, I would probably give it to Usyk just because of his unification at the cruiserweight division, either over some semi-talented fighters. And of course, he was able to almost unify the heavyweight division by having 3 out of the 4 main titles, by beating Anthony Joshua twice, pretty definitively, in my view. At least a good 8 rounds to 4 in both of those fights at a minimum. So Usyk right now would probably be not my number one pound per pound fighter. But for some of you, of course, that would vote Canelo still. I wouldn't really have an issue with it. For some of you, of course, that would debate Terence Crawford or Errol Spence Jr. I'm not really sure if I would debate Errol Spence just because he doesn't really have the work in other weight divisions, but one could debate it, especially possibly over Terence Crawford, because Crawford, in my view, he just doesn't really have the resume. And I've already stated in the past that at the current moment, even though a lot of people have the Japanese monster, Naoya Inoue, or Naoya Inoue, however you pronounce his name, a lot of people have him as the number one pound per pound fighter. I certainly cannot have him as my number one pound per pound fighter because I also do not think that he has the best of resumes. So would it really be fair of me to put Terence Crawford at the number one spot when I don't believe that he has a clear A-plus resume? Because in my view, for you to be the debatable number one pound per pound fighter, you have to have in the category of an A to an A-plus resume. And I think that Terence Crawford, I think that he now probably has an A-grade resume, but it's not in the A-plus or A-grade category. It's probably in the A-minus category. But anyways, Terence Crawford recently did an interview in Boxing Eagle, who of course I like to review here and there. I tend to agree with him sometimes, I tend to disagree with him sometimes, but this video I thought was interesting. Terence Crawford is going to talk about, in his view, why the people should believe that he is going to beat that of Errol Spence Jr. And it is going to be a colossal fight when it happens. and it's going to be very interesting. But anyways, I'm going to break it down, put my 2 cents in the best way that I can. Let's get straight into it.
You seen Errol Spence, Sean Porter. You seen Errol Spence, um, Kell Brook. You seen Terence Crawford, Kell Brook. Terence Crawford, Sean Porter. And you tell me, the difference in those two fights that both of us had previous with the two same opponents.
Terence Triangle Theory Crawford, he back at it. He compares his...
Anyways, overall, what Terence Bud Crawford is trying to allege here, and he has the right to his own opinion, of course. Terence Bud Crawford is one of the best and most dominant fighters on the planet, no doubt about it. But what Terence Bud Crawford was trying to allege is that if you take a look at the comparisons between when I fought Kell Brook and when I fought Sean Porter versus when he fought those guys, it really wasn't even a comparison because I dominated them so much more thoroughly. And one could argue, especially with the Sean Porter fight, that he was more dominant in that fight than what that of an Errol Spence Jr. fight was, or the Errol Spence Jr. performance. But I don't think I would really count Kell Brook, and the reason why I say that is because Kell Brook was pretty much a done fighter. And I'm not one of these guys that likes to say that a certain fighter is washed up unless I truly believe that they're washed. But Kell Brook was washed. I mean, yeah, he ended up getting that victory over Amir Khan, but Amir Khan was washed as well. Like when Amir Khan and Kell Brook, when they had that fight finally, it pretty much was, a battle between two fighters that were pretty much chopped liver. Neither of those fighters were ever going to win another title in their careers ever again, as long as they had fought somebody decent. And in my view, Kell Brook, he was not going to beat anyone super duper elite at the welterweight division. He had completely been stripped of his boxing ability after those two losses back to back, one to Gennady Golovkin in a knockout loss, and another one to Errol Spence Jr. And I thought that Kell Brook still was an A-grade fighter when he fought Errol Spence Jr. I did not think that he was an A-grade fighter when he fought Terence Bud Crawford. Now, on the other hand, I do believe that when Sean Porter fought Terence Bud Crawford, that Sean Porter was an A-grade level fighter because Sean had never been stopped before. And yes, one could maybe make the point that, he was in a multitude of wars with Danny Garcia, Kell Brook, Keith Thurman. One could make that argument, but if you're also going to make that argument, then we also have to make the same argument about Manny Pacquiao versus possibly Marco Antonio Barrera or Eric Morales. We have to also make that same point with Floyd Mayweather and Miguel Cotto. We have to make the same argument with a certain amount of other fighters. So it just is what it is. I don't think that Sean Porter, at least in my view, I don't think that he was depleted enough to the point to where I could say that he clearly was not the same fighter. Sean Porter looked like the same fighter to me. He gave it a very competitive go. It's just that he was in the ring with a fighter that was that much better than him. And it's not like the fight was not competitive. You can argue, in my view, that Sean Porter pulled out at least a good 3 to 4 rounds. I think I gave him 3 rounds, and 3 or 4 of those rounds that I gave him were in the beginning of the fight. But Terence Bud Crawford, of course, eventually he was able to adapt to Sean Porter's style, and eventually he was able to stop him, which, of course, not even the great Errol Spence Jr. was able to do, nor Keith Thurman, nor Kell Brook. In fact, I only remember, when it comes down to it, I only remember even one fighter knocking down Sean Porter in the past, and that was Adrian Broner. Actually, that's not true. Errol Spence Jr. ended up knocking him down once as well, but Keith Thurman nor Kell Brook could knock him down either, so that really shows you, once again, the caliber of those two fighters.
Victories over mutual opponents through that of Errol Spence Jr. In this video, I will explain why, in the world of boxing, that is a no-no. I'll fully break that down.
Well, triangle theory has never completely worked. Now, of course, to a degree, at times you can make a little bit of an analysis of that, because if someone looks so limited against a certain level of competition when they did not before, you might be able to kind of gauge and say, okay, maybe they wouldn't do so well because this other fighter did so much better against them. But a lot of the times the triangle theory does not work because as boxing historians say, styles make fights. And that doesn't really just even go for boxing. That goes for every sport out there. I remember, for those of you that ever watched tennis, Novak Djokovic, I believe it was all the way back either in 2015 or 2016. I think maybe 2015, but I can't really remember. Anyways, whatever the date was, Novak Djokovic had actually defeated Rafael Nadal in that of the French Open, that of the Roland Garros. And people thought that once Novak Djokovic had done that, that there was going to be nobody that stood in his way. Well, and little did people know, Stan Wawrinka, Stan the Man, as many people call him, or the Stanimal, another Swedish player, I believe, or not Swedish, excuse me, but from Switzerland. Maybe those people are called the Swedes. I can't necessarily remember. But anyways, when it comes down to it, he was able to dominate Novak Djokovic in that final, even though a lot of people, of course, thought that, well, because Novak Djokovic had defeated Nadal, of course he was going to defeat Stan Wawrinka. And it doesn't always end up like that. Another example, for those of you that remember that Carolina Panthers run all the way back in the 2015-2016 season, the Carolina Panthers were able to go 15-1 that season. They had beaten certain regular season teams like that of the Colts and other teams like that. Well, the Broncos in one of their games and one of their losses had lost to the Indianapolis Colts. But in the Super Bowl, the Broncos defense especially was able to completely limit and completely dominate that offense from start to finish, to the point to where Carolina, I don't think they scored any more than that at 10 points. So the triangle theory does not always work to the greatest of degrees. And of course, we also, in boxing, can use the fact that, Manny Pacquiao looked better against Miguel Cotto than what Floyd Mayweather Jr. did. And, Floyd Mayweather Jr. ended up dominating Manny Pacquiao, or at least early beating him. Some, of course, may also debate that that was due to a weight drain, but, neither here nor there, at least kind of at the point. I mean, some would debate that it is, but, the main point is that the triangle theory does not always work, no matter what the sport. You have to really, truly analyze it. So I understand what Mr. Ego is saying. However, what I will say is this. Terence Bud Crawford, in my view, he did have the better performance over that of a Sean Porter. And in my view, what Terence Bud Crawford did show to be his advantages, just in my view, over that of an Errol Spence Jr., is superior foot speed, superior counterpunching ability, and just superior swiftness. Probably a little bit of the higher boxing IQ. But one thing that does worry me about Terence Bud Crawford, at least if you're a fan of Terence Bud Crawford, let's just say, and like I said, I don't think it's good to be a fan, but let's just say you were rooting for him in the fight. What does worry me about Terence Bud Crawford a little bit is that at times he can tend to have his hands down a little bit too much. And a lot of the times he'll also have his chin way up too high in the air. And a lot of the times Terence will sometimes get in a little bit too much of exchanges for his own good, with his hands not being up sometimes in that of the proper position. That's why against Gamboa, that's why against Aegis Velasquez, that's why against, certain other fighters like that, Felix Diaz or Sean Porter, he's been pushed back and hurt a couple times because sometimes he keeps his hands down a little bit too much for his own good.
Make sure you guys enjoy. What up, Fight World? It's your boy Ego, and I'm back with some more boxing. Subscribe to the channel, hit the bell notification icon. I am the best in the business. Now, shout out to Gilly and Wallow. They got a good chemistry, and they bring people on their podcast, and they get really some good reactions and good stuff. So shout out to them. They did an interview with Terence Crawford, and you heard the beginning clip. That was Terence Crawford on $1 million worth of game. And I guess one of the baseline of his argument on why he's better than Errol Spence is a triangle theory. Now, to the haters, I'm only going to give you a half a bar. There's some people who say, oh, you're hating on Terence Crawford. If you know, you know. I've never been a fan of triangle theories in the sport of boxing. I will explain in this particular...
Well, that's great, Mr. Eagle, but let's also be real. For whatever reason, and I'm not exactly sure what the reason is, it could be because Terence Bud Crawford is not with that of the PBC. We do know that a lot of new media and the LDBC, especially, that they prefer that of the PBC fighters because it is pretty much owned and operated by that of the Black Al Heyman, which is cool. I think that Al Heyman is a great advisor. But, of course, that does lead to a lot of racial politics and favoritism. And so it is what it is. But anyways, when it comes down to it, it's very clear that in the past that Ego has always taken Errol Spence Jr.'s side for whatever reason. I'm not necessarily sure what it is. Now, do I agree with Ego in this instance? Yes, I do, at least to a degree. Now, the Sean Porter fight, in my view, there might be a little bit of substance there because, once again, Terence, in my view, showed certain qualities in that fight, including better foot speed and, probably overall just quicker feet, quicker hands, better counterpunching ability, better hand placement, better punch placement. I think that he showed certain things that Errol Spence may not have. But, of course, Errol Spence has certain things that maybe Terence Bud Crawford may not have either. So this fight's going to be very interesting.
The video. So no matter who does these weird, bizarre triangle theories, I'm never a fan of it. But I know the Bud buddies, they get mad and they say, "Oh, you're hating on Bud." But I'm not here to tell you what you want to hear. I am here to tell you what you need to hear. So I don't care.
Well, Ego, I would usually respect that, and I do respect that, but let's be real. When it comes to a fighter that you tend to like Deontay Wilder or Gervonta Tank Davis, you tend to tell them what they want to hear, even when the evidence would be clearly against that side. Like when Deontay Wilder alleged that he got cheated and there was no evidence, and Gervonta Tank Davis bombing that Isaac Pitbull Cruz pay-per-view, but you were still trying to allege that it did great numbers, or that it did a great event. And of course, the arena sold out, but the pay-per-view wise, it completely bombed because nobody wanted to see that fight. Point being is this: for whatever reason, like I said, more than likely because Terence is now with the PBC, or maybe he's just a Spence fan over that at Terence Bud Crawford. Maybe he thinks that Crawford has been a little bit overrated in terms of his resume, which I can understand that a little bit. I'm not exactly sure what it is. It could be a multitude of factors, but for whatever reason, I know who Ego's going to be supporting in this fight, which, it's whatever. You support whoever you want to. But I do have to wonder, why has he repeatedly supported Errol Spence over that Terence Bud Crawford?
About your thin skin because you can't take criticism and people who get mad because I'm speaking my honest opinion. Because the brilliant thing about YouTube is you don't have to watch me. That being said, moving on. The reason why I don't believe in triangle theories is because they never have worked in the sport of boxing. Never, ever, ever have a triangle theory worked in boxing successfully. Not saying.
Well, they're never going to work 100% of the time because, once again, a lot of people don't really get that styles make matchups or styles make fights. And like I said, that goes for any sport. It don't really matter what it is. That goes for tennis, which I watch a lot. That goes for soccer. That goes for football. That goes for that of basketball. It goes for any of those things. Any of them. Because each and every single thing, or team or athlete, they could have a particularly different style. And they could favor completely differently depending on who they're facing.
You can't think of one example of a triangle theory where X, Y, and Z breaks down. But what I am saying is, for every one you do think of, I could think of 2 or 3 where the triangle theory doesn't play out. Because you have to understand, most don't know ish about boxing. They sure enough don't. So triangle theories don't work because you're not going to reduce the sweet science to some kind of mathematic or algebraic expression. That's not how it works.
I agree. And another great example is the Devin Haney-Vasily Lomachenko fight, because George Kambosos was the guy that beat Teofimo, who of course was the guy that beat Lomachenko, Teofimo Lopez. And a lot of people said, well, Devin Haney completely dominated George Kambosos. What do you think he's going to do to Lomachenko? And like I predicted, the fight was more competitive. Devin Haney did end up winning the decision like I had predicted. Now, of course, a lot of people thought that it was a bit controversial. I think that it could have went either way, so I don't really mind it. Yes, I do believe that Lomachenko probably all around landed the more impactful punches, but one could debate that Devin Haney was more active. So, and like I said, Lomachenko's 35, Eastern European fighter. They're not going to give it to you at this point when they can make very big fights with Devin Haney and Gervonta Tank Davis and Devin Haney and that of Shakur Stevenson, unless you really, really, really took that fight. And it was a fight that could have went either way anyway. You weren't getting that decision. So it is what it is. But anyways, I agree with Mr. Ego that the triangle theory a lot of the times that it does not work because it depends completely on matchups.
Different people have different qualities, different attributes. Timing is very pertinent in the sport of boxing. If you fought a guy, like let's say Canelo, he knocked out Carlos Baldemir, who is a nasty fellow. Look it up. But anyway, Canelo was 19 and he...
A nasty fellow, yes. And what he's referring to is that rape case with a minor, of course, actually his own daughter, that of, I believe, a couple years ago, where he was in prison for that of 20 years.
Brutally knocked out Carlos Baldemir. Other past greats, like Floyd Mayweather, didn't knock him out, or Zab Judah. But they fought a prime Carlos Baldemir, not a
I'd agree with that.
40, 41-year-old.
But a great example with Canelo Alvarez could be that of, say, when you talk about Canelo Alvarez when he defeated Miguel Cotto. Miguel Cotto had a much, much, much tougher fight with Floyd Mayweather Jr. against Canelo Alvarez. Canelo was probably more dominant in that fight than what Mayweather was against Cotto. And some people may say, well, Cotto was completely washed. No, he wasn't washed. Cotto was still a very good fighter, and people try to say he was old. He was 33 years old. Now, some people can age a little bit more at 33 years old, depending on their style and just depending on how their body eventually breaks down. Or for some fighters, no longer being able to be on PEDs like they once were, because I might be closely watched. But anyways, when it comes down to it, like I said, no, Cotto was not old in that fight. But once again, that's a good example.
Carlos Baldomir, like Canelo did. And speaking of, since Floyd is the GOAT, Floyd fought Canelo. So even though Canelo had a more emphatic knockout of the same mutual opponent, Carlos Baldomir, what happened when Floyd, easy work, I ain't got to worry about it, hard work, dedication, when he fought Canelo? All that Baldomir stuff went out the window. Once again, that's one example of how triangle theories just don't work. Baltimore.
I agree. Another one, if you want to use it, not to drag this on too much, but Canelo versus Angulo versus Lara and Angulo. Lara got knocked down a couple times in that fight against Alfredo Angulo. Of course, one could argue that he was being a little bit too cocky for his own good by keeping his hands down the whole entire fight. But when it comes down to it, Araceli Lara got knocked down and had a very close fight with Angulo. Canelo whooped his ass from pillar to post. And that fight was a debatable fight that you could have gave to anybody. I'm talking about the Lara Canelo fight, that is.
Viciously knocked out by Canelo Alvarez. Floyd beat him in dominant fashion, but beat him in a more competitive fight, but he was in his prime. And then later on, when Floyd and Canelo fought, Canelo got spanked. So Crawford, he should know better because he's a great boxer, that these triangle theories really don't work throughout boxing history. And Crawford's team is constantly saying that X, Y, and Z, and you don't know about boxing. If you disagree with them, they say you don't know about boxing. So I think Crawford knows enough about boxing to know if you're talking about the history of the sport of boxing, I could think of several examples where triangle theories just don't really matter. They don't make any sense. And to use that as your speaking point is really concerning. And I would even venture to take it a step further and say it's not even just boxing. You could look at most sports. You would have to factor in who they were at the time of the meetup. For example, let's say we'll use the NBA. If Kobe Bryant was in the finals, which this is all fact, Kobe Bryant played in the finals in the 2008 finals against the Boston Celtics. One of the players was Ray Allen. So let's say in 2023, your boy Ego played a one-on-one game against Ray Allen and destroyed him, and I dropped 80 points on him, right? Just hypothetically. You got to work with me. 2020.
I was about to say 80 points, goddamn.
I hoop with Ray Allen, and I destroy him, and I drop 80 points on him. Can you then say, oh, in 2008, Kobe Bryant didn't even drop 80 points on Ray Allen, so Ego is the GOAT? Of course not. You would never.
That's a fair point. I understand what he's trying to say. I think I would have used a little bit of a different analogy, but I understand what he's trying to say.
Say that because in 2008, Ray Allen was a younger player. Right now, in 2023, Ray Allen is like 47, 48, pushing 50 years old, and he's retired. So it's a completely different Ray Allen. This is not he got game and Jesus Shuttleworth Ray Allen. So as I always say on my channel, context is everything. You need context to what you're saying. You can't say, oh, Ego better than Kobe Bryant because even Kobe didn't do this to him, because it was a completely different team in 2008 versus,
I agree. And this is what Dante and some of these other channels that I like to review, they've also been trying to push this narrative. And if I had to guess, this is also a big part of the reason why Ego gets a little bit annoyed with some of the Terence Bud Crawford fans, because sometimes they'll try to push, or like Dante's Boxing Nation, for example, who's been trying to push Terence Bud Crawford for a very long time. He sides with Terence Bud Crawford just a little bit over Errol Spence Jr. He tries to say that, oh, well, Terence basically has a better resume. He knocked out Amir Khan and he knocked out Kell Brook and he beat this guy. Like, I'm sorry, but when you really take a look at their fights just side by side, it's really not even that close. When you talk about the resume, not even just at welterweight, but really just throughout their whole entire career. Once again, Errol Spence has wins over Danny Garcia, Sean Porter, Kell Brook, Yordenis Ugas, and there might even be one other guy that I'm not remembering at the moment. Like, all those guys are decent A-grade level fighters or very, decent fighters. Terence Bud Crawford only has one very good win at the welterweight division, that being Sean Porter. Kell Brook and Amir Khan, they were pretty much done. And even in the other weight divisions, like I said, it's not to hate on Terence Bud Crawford. It's not to offend anybody. But like I said, the best wins, like, he really only has one very good win per division. The Yuriorkis Gamboa win at the 135-pound weight division. And even that is not a debatable A-grade win because Gamboa, in my view, he was just a fighter that eventually was just going to get exposed. He was always way too wild and way too defensively irresponsible for his own good. He rarely kept his hands up, and he got knocked down a lot of the times throughout his career because he kept his hands down and he was a bit too chinny. So it is what it is. He got too wild and too crazy for his own good, and that's why eventually, afterwards, he also would lose a multitude of fights because once he started losing his athleticism, a lot of the deficiencies in his game really started to show. So it is what it is. But anyways, then later on we talk about a Victor Postal, who in my view never really has been a confirmed A-grade fighter. Maybe A- at the most, but I don't even think I would say that because Victor Postal's never been able to win a big fight in his career besides that of Lucas Matisse. Never. Every other fight, he pretty much either got dominated or he lost.
Several years later,
And Sean Porter, of course, probably the biggest win in Terence Bud Crawford's career. That's an A-grade win, but in my view, it's probably an A- win. Some people count Sean Porter as a B fighter. I don't think I'm going to count him as that because in my view, Danny Garcia, he's always been an A- level fighter. I've always held Danny Garcia in somewhat of high regard, and Sean Porter was able to beat him. He also was able to beat Paulie Malignaggi and dominate him, beat Devin Alexander. Of course, get the controversial win over Yordenis Ugas, but Sean Porter has a little bit of work in his career.
Thing is no different, and I could do that.
And against Keith Thurman and Errol Spence and Kell Brook, there's a lot of people that believe that Sean Porter won all those fights. Do I personally believe that he won any of those fights? No. Maybe the Keith Thurman fight, but they were at least very competitive.
All day because I'm the king of boxing. I'm the king of boxing talk.
Even against Terence Bud Crawford, it was very competitive until probably the last portion of the fight.
In the business, I could do this all day. So look at Floyd Mayweather.
Look at you, hostess with the mostest.
How does she do it?
But no one knows that early
Business, I could do this all day. So look at Floyd Mayweather. Pacquiao made his name off of he had Floyd leftovers or guys that Floyd fought and he had quote unquote beat them better. Guys like Miguel Cotto got knocked out by Pacquiao. I think it was in the 11th round.
There was a little bit of that, yes, where Pacquiao did fight some of Mayweather's leftovers or fight some of the guys that Mayweather had already beat. But there also was a lot of guys that Pacquiao defeated that Mayweather had not fought yet, or that overall that he did not beat himself, like Marquez yet, or that of, say, Miguel Cotto or Eric Morales or Marco Antonio Barrera. Now, do I agree that the media tried to do that with Manny Pacquiao, that they tried to push him over Mayweather, especially by fighting certain guys that Mayweather had already beaten? And maybe was it possible that some of those fighters are not the same? Yeah, you could say that. But what I will say is this: it's what it isn't correct to say is that Manny Pacquiao built his name basically by losing to Floyd Mayweather, because that wouldn't make any sense. Because that's certain narratives that Dante and, let's be real, some of these other pro-black channels, these other channels like Dante, Aki, they've been trying to say when, no, that's not the reality of it. Manny Pacquiao built his name way before he fought Mayweather, but at the end of the day, yes, they did try to do that a bit, with Manny Pacquiao fighting some of his leftovers. Yes, that is true. And they did a similar thing with Terence Bud Crawford.
Top of the dome. You had Ricky Hatton. When Pacquiao fought him, it took only 2 rounds or so for Pacquiao to brutally knock him out. Floyd Mayweather, it was quasi-competitive, and then Floyd TKO'd him against the turnbuckle when Floyd fought Ricky Hatton. But guess what? Triangle theory. None of that matters. Oh, Pacquiao beat these guys better and all this other stuff, right?
I agree. That's why I used the Pacquiao Mayweather triangle theory earlier.
What happened when Floyd Mayweather and Manny Pacquiao fought? Manny Pacquiao got skunked. So again, I'm showing you.
You notice that the only two fighters that he says skunked or spanked with is Manny Pacquiao and that of Canelo Alvarez. And the reason why that is because new media and the LDBC, and I get it to a degree, I do get it because a lot of black fighters, they've had to deal with a lot of criticism from that of quote-unquote old media and that of certain fans, non-black fans, that of, of boxing, whether they be that of Asian fans, Latino fans, Caucasian fans. Look, I get it, but at the end of the day, if you're going to uphold a standard to where you're going to be a logical and objective thinker, you have to be above that standard. You have to be above the low standard, and I understand, I truly do. But at the end of the day, it's very obvious that ego and a lot of these other channels, and that's a big part of the reason why they have an issue with that of certain fighters like Canelo, Vasily Lomachenko, Alexander Usyk, Tyson Fury, and it's very, Naoya Inoue. It's very hard for those guys to give certain fighters like these their flowers, because if they do end up winning some of those big fights, then they have to say, shit, I have to put them in the top pound for pound discussion. And then they're going to try to put them over other all-time great fighters or other black fighters, even when it's more than likely not deserved, at least in that same regard. So I get it. I understand. But that's why you have to be a logical and objective thinker above all else. Because if you're just going to return and say, well, they're playing their certain racial politics or they're playing their politics, so I'm going to be a politician back, well, that's cool. But all that tells me is that you're not a logical and objective thinker, that you're letting them control your mindset way too much.
Real-time examples how this is not a good logic triangle theory in the world of boxing. And I'm not saying Terence Crawford can't win, but your argument shouldn't be because you beat Sean Porter by stoppage and Errol Spence didn't. Sean Porter wasn't a podcaster when he fought Errol Spence. I was there live, right? He wasn't.
Well, listen here, Ego. I understand what you're trying to say, but let's not sit here and say that Sean Porter was not the same fighter. I agree with you on the Kell Brook point, and I agree with you. Well, I don't think you brought up Amir Khan, but Amir Khan was not the same fighter either. I agree with you on both of those points. What I do not agree with you with is that Sean Porter was not the same fighter. Sean Porter was the same fighter. He was the same fighter.
Wasn't doing that. He actually started the podcast during the pandemic in 2020. He fought Errol Spence in 2019. So you fought different versions of Sean Porter.
No, he fought the same version of Sean Porter. I understand what Ego was trying to say, but no, he did not fight a weaker version of Sean Porter. I'm sorry, he just did not.
Also said he had arthritis and knew he was going to retire. Same thing with Kell Brook. Kell Brook fought one other fight against...
Kell Brook for sure was not the same fighter because he had been completely done. He had never looked the same after those two fights against Gennady Golovkin and Errol Spence. He had been completely done. He was completely tarnished after that. And Amir Khan was not really the same either, but I can't really say that with Sean Porter. Because Sean Porter, once again, I mean, yeah, he had been in a multitude of wars, but it's not like anyone really said, wow, Sean Porter is really on the decline. Like no one really ever said that. I mean, there was a couple people against Yordenis Ugas, but truth be told, Sean Porter, because of some of the deficiencies in his game, he's just always going to have problems against fighters that have decent boxing ability. And Ugas is not necessarily an A-plus level fighter, but he's a guy that's very smart. He has decent power. He can push you back. So he's a guy that can be very dangerous. So I'm not really buying into this narrative that Sean Porter was not the same fighter. I understand what Ego is trying to say, but I don't agree with that.
Equally washed Amir Khan and
I agree with that.
Cashed out in there, and then he retired.
And that's so interesting because Dante's Boxing Nation and Aki TV, those two guys, leaders of the Clown Club, they always try to say this shit about certain fighters like Canelo or Vasily Lomachenko that they fought Nicholas Walters or Rigondeaux off a year layoff, but they don't ever say shit about Terence Bud Crawford, one of the biggest wins in his career. He fought Gamboa when Gamboa was out for a year. So it's like, if you're going to use those same standards, where's the criticism for Terence Bud Crawford? And then they say, oh, well, Canelo, he only beat Danny Jacobs and some of those other guys when they had already lost, even though Danny Jacobs still very clearly was at the best point in his career. And no problem. If you want to use those standards, I wouldn't agree. No problem. But that's how you can tell a person is full of shit, because they use that standard for Canelo Alvarez. But then when it comes to Terence Crawford, they're like, oh man, can you believe that he beat Kell Brook? Can you believe that he beat Amir Khan? Oh my God. You know, it's like, dude, Amir Khan was knocked out 3 separate times in his career by the time that Terence Crawford beat him. It's not even like he was like TKO'd. Like, the dude had his soul taken 3 separate times, especially against Canelo Alvarez. That boy was out. That boy was out for a damn hour. Anyway.
So,
and Kell Brook, of course, had been already knocked out twice. So, once again, that goes to show you there's a big reason why I like to review their videos, because, once again, a lot of the times they love to tell you that, you know, oh, they're trying to bring the black fighters down, and sometimes they are. That can be a true statement. But the reason why I like to review their videos is because I don't think they always bring up bad points, but a lot of the times you can tell that there's a deeper narrative or machination afoot.
Both guys that Crawford is using to uplift, I guess, his resume, both guys retired within a fight or so of fighting you. And the last thing I will say, one of the biggest things that irks me with triangle theories is this. When you use a triangle theory, you also negate the fact of when Errol fought Sean Porter, what about he put so much punishment in such a grueling fight that aged Sean Porter? You completely take this out of...
Well, one could debate that to a degree, but if you're going to allege that, then you would also have to allege that with certain fighters, like a Miguel Cotto when he fought Floyd Mayweather Jr., because Miguel Cotto had suffered 2 very bad beatings, one against Antonio Margarito in the first fight, and also that against Manny Pacquiao. Like, he was completely bludgeoned in both of those fights. It was very bad, the amount of damage that he took, and it probably took years off of his career, to be quite honest with you, both of those fights. One of them, of course, probably being dirty with the Antonio Margarito fight. You know, if you wanted to allege that, you would also have to allege it with certain other fights. You know, debatably, Sean Porter against Errol Spence Jr., because Sean Porter had 2 wars, one against Kell Brook, one against Keith Thurman. One could say that aged him a little bit. So, I mean, I don't know. One could certainly say that those fights are farther apart. You know, the Sean Porter and the Keith Thurman fight and the Sean Porter and Errol Spence fight, that was farther apart than the Errol Spence and Terence Crawford fight when they fought Sean Porter. But I agree with the Kell Brook thing, but I don't think I can really quite bite on the Sean Porter one. Because it's not like Sean Porter looked extra aged to me. He still was just as competitive against Terence Bud Crawford as he was against any other fighter. It's just that he was clearly in a fight against a fighter that was probably a fighter that he had never seen before.
The equation. So by the time you get him, it's already a lesser version. We know this. Guys go into depression after fighting Errol Spence. Danny Garcia said he was depressed. Kell Brook said he was depressed after the Spence fight. So what about that?
Yeah, but I'm not quite sure if Sean Porter was depressed. Sean Porter had already lost a couple of times in his career. And on top of that, it was a split decision. I don't think that there's really anything better that you could have asked for if you were Sean Porter, other than, of course, to win the fight. But I think even Sean Porter knew that he was not going to win the fight. I could tell that he was talking, you know, the way he was talking before the fight. But, you know.
What about the whole fact of guys may not be the same guy after they fight a given fighter? If you fight a Gervonta Davis, if you fight Deontay Wilder, if you fight Errol Spence, Better Biev, some guys aren't the same after these.
Well, I agree with you. Once again, I full on agree with you, and that happens a lot. But I don't think that I can quite say that with Sean Porter.
Types of grueling fights against vicious punchers and, you know, that come forward style. Look at Mikey Garcia. Can we say Mikey Garcia was the same fighter? He took like a year plus off after the Errol Spence fight, right? And then he did an exhibition.
Well, the reason why Mikey Garcia took a fucking year plus off, and I've been saying this for years, because he was trying to get that Manny Pacquiao fight. He was trying to get the Manny Pacquiao fight, you know, potentially, I can't remember if Pacquiao was a champion or not at the time, maybe become a 5-weight division champion. If he won the fight, you know, cool. If he didn't, whatever. He could pretty much cash out into retirement. That's the reason why Mikey Garcia wanted that fight, you know, and I think he kind of continued because he still wanted to get the fight. And then, of course, he ended up losing, I believe, to, what the hell was that dude's name? Salvador or Martin, whatever the fuck his name was, the Spaniard fighter. You know, the dude who recently had a very tough fight against that of, what the hell was his name? Teofimo Lopez, but the Spaniard fighter. Anyways, when it came down to that was the thing about Mikey Garcia. He was not interested in fighting any top competitors. I had already stated that Mikey really wanted to retire for years. He wanted that super fight against Manny Pacquiao, and then he was out of there.
With Eric Morales, and then he came to lose to Sandor Martin,
There he is, Sandor Martin.
vicious, huge underdog, and things like that. What are we talking about, bro? See, don't tell me I don't know what.
But I don't know if Mikey Garcia really wasn't the same fighter after Errol Spence Jr. I think that he was prepared to use that excuse just in case he had to get in the ring with Lomachenko or someone else that may have had a potentially great chance against him. And I liked Mikey as a fighter. He's a great fighter, but Mikey was up to some bullshit in his career. Just is what it is. And almost no one ever talks about it.
I'm talking about. I'm the king of boxing, best in the business. Subscribe to the channel. Triangle theories just don't work, people.
But anyways, that's pretty much about it for today. I just thought that was very particularly interesting. This fight is going to be a great one. And, you know, just an early prediction of who I think might win. It really depends which versions I believe are going to come up. If the best version of Terence Bud Crawford shows up, I may predict him to win. I do believe that his all-around boxing IQ probably is just slightly superior. But at the end of the day, Errol Spence has great boxing IQ as well. And if we're talking about certain advantages that both fighters have, I think that Terence Bud Crawford has the superior counter-punching and punch placement. I think that he has the superior foot speed, foot speed and probably footwork, even though Errol Spence does have good foot placement and footwork. I just think that it's slower compared to that of Terence Bud Crawford's. I also think that Terence has probably more slicker head movement, but they both have a little bit of a problem with their head being down the center line just too often sometimes. Not that it's really a huge problem. They both have good head movement. Well, at least Terence Bud Crawford does. But the big problem with Terence is that he loves to keep his hands down a lot in order to be faster. And a lot of the times his chin is also wide up in the air. So he's going to have to be very careful because I promise you, if Errol Spence Jr. hits you with one of those good left crosses or a good hook, it ain't going to feel good. And Terence, he does not have the strongest chin that I've ever seen. It isn't that it's necessarily weak per se, but I'm not going to say that it's a Canelo Alvarez or Gennady Golovkin type of chin. So he's going to have to watch out in that fight because if Errol hits him with a good whopper, you know, that could potentially hurt. And I think that more than likely Errol could take a good shot before Terence could take a good shot and possibly not get knocked down or knocked out. So he's going to have to be careful. As for Errol Spence, he is not going to have the speed nor that of the counter-punching ability over Terence Bud Crawford. He probably is going to have to pressure Terence in order to make the fight in his way, in my view. He also is going to have to move his head a little bit more than what he's used to. Sometimes his head does stay a little bit too much down the center line. Not that he moves his head badly necessarily, but sometimes it's a little bit too slow. Sometimes he needs to do it a bit more often. So we'll see what happens. Very, very good fight. But anyways, that's pretty much about it for today. Thank you so much for watching. I'll talk to you all later.